going to lay out some ground rules real quick and introduce our speaker for today. Again, if you have questions, we are going to leave everyone muted during Steve's presentation. We encourage you, if you do have questions, to please use the chat section and write your questions down there. If you are not familiar with Zoom, if you look at the menu that is along the bottom of your screen, you will see an icon that looks like a text icon that says chat. You'll want to click that and you can write your question for Steve there, and I will be curating those. And after Steve has concluded his presentation, we will get to as many questions as we can. So thank you again for that. We're thrilled to have a great assembly for our very first virtual program. I see 59 people on this Zoom conference, and we're going to be doing this again next week. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but right now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Steve Purdy is a Williamston, Michigan-based multimedia automotive journalist. He's a charter member of the Automotive Press Association. He's a member of the Society of Automotive Historians and a trustee of the National Automotive History Collection of the Detroit Public Library, among many other things. But without any further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Steve Purdy.
Well, thank you, Bob, and welcome everyone to this little piece of my world, where we're all consumed by the appreciation of automotive heritage. In this case, the history and aesthetics of automotive hood ornaments, sometimes known as mascots. These images and stories are a gallery exhibit, a lecture, and if I can find the time, they'll become a coffee table book someday. All are projects of Shunpiker Productions. Now, a shunpiker, for those unfamiliar with that term, is one who shuns the turnpike, takes the back roads instead of the highway, in the spirit of Charles Kuralt, Jack Kerouac, and William Least Heat Moon. We need the next slide, Brian. There we go. Shunpiker Productions produces words, photos, and projects for those to whom an automobile is more than transportation. Now, like all cars and all people, each mascot has its own story that needs to be told. Let's begin with perhaps the best known of all, the Rolls-Royce Spirit of Ecstasy. Lord Montague, financial backer of Rolls-Royce and editor of a popular car magazine of the day, wanted a mascot for his 1909 Silver Ghost. He commissioned his friend, famous sculptor of the day, Charles Sykes, to create one. Sykes chose for his model an office clerk named Eleanor Thornton. Well, here's what, and he came up with this image right here. Charles Sykes called it, quote, a graceful little goddess, the spirit of ecstasy, who has selected road travel as her supreme delight and alighted on the prow of a Rolls-Royce motor car to revel in the freshness of the air and the musical sound of her fluttering draperies. Well, stories abound about young Ms. Thornton being the muse or mistress of Lord Montague. After all, she died in his company when their ship was sunk near Crete as they were on their way to India. Now, not all mascots have such an interesting story, but there's stories behind them all. So now, as a photographer, let me share a few stories about capturing some of these images as we go along through this talk. I wanted to show you this image of a hood ornament of a 1951 Pontiac Chieftain, because it was the first I thought worthy of enlarging and framing. I had inherited a Canon FTB with a 200 millimeter fixed focal length lens, and looking through that viewfinder, I began to see the close-up details of my surroundings, blossoms, faces, and particularly hood ornaments at car shows. This image was taken in the early days of our Meadowbrook Concours d'Elegance with the early morning sun coming in behind the chief. Now, a popular theme for these mascots is a goddess in flowing robes. Next slide, please, Brian. There we go. this theme you'll see in a lot of the images here. In fact, we'll go through a bunch of them right now, but sometimes she'll have wings, sometimes she'll be naked, but always graceful. We've seen this DeSoto, that next one, Brian. We've seen this DeSoto babe in chrome and this material. Not sure if it's glass or plastic or bakelite or what, but she sure is graceful. Late Art Deco, this sort of late Art Deco comes from the 1940s. And another, next one, Brian. This Cadillac V16, boy, she's graceful, and she's leaning into the wind. Before the General Motors Cadillac collection moved to the current Heritage Center, it was housed in an old warehouse. I shot this on film with poor light, and I'm not sure how that came out so good. The Packard Donut Chaser. Well, here's an early Packard mascot in an early Art Deco style. So she's thrusting a wheel out in front of her. Her nickname became the Donut Chaser. Adonis Sliding, or the Sliding Boy is what they call this one. It's another Packard hood ornament. And you know, Packard had a variety of hood ornaments over the years, and they would change and they would evolve. And you'll see more of that theme next. Here's the Cormorant. They use this in a variety of vehicles. The Packard Cormorant. And birds and images provide another genre to present the best of a brand. Notice how many different images Packard used. The next one, another version of the Cormorant. See, her wings changed and her posture changed just a little bit. And next. Now here's one. They've taken the Cormorant, and I don't know if the factory did this or not. That's some research I'll have to do, but that's a radio antenna attached to the back of that Cormorant. Now here is perhaps the second best known hood ornament is Jaguar's Leaper. Now look at the reflections of this one. As a photographer, this is I just love this shot. The reflections you see there are the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Amelia Island. And this was taken at sunrise in the RM auction lot. Now Pontiac became Pontiac in 1928 and became as a part of General Motors, replacing Oakland. And this is one of its first hood ornaments. Well, this would be its first hood ornament. And I must say that that stern-faced Indian chief from the 1700s has been interpreted in so many different ways over the years, and he always seems to catch my eye at the shows. So let me show you a few more versions of the Pontiac chief. Fire in his eye. This shot was taken at the 50s Festival in Marshall of a 1950 Pontiac. I was bobbing around trying to get the clear background behind it. It was just about sunset. And as I bobbed around, his eye lit up. Now that's the reflection. I don't know if the car or the sunset, one or the other, but that's not paint in his eye. That's the light in his eye. The next one. And here's that 50s Pontiac. This is a 1950, and it's originally it was a bakelite, and they aged beautifully with checks and cracks and stuff inside the thing. But this is a reproduction. This shows you how they reproduce hood ornaments. Now these lit up when you turn the headlights on, just like an extra parking light. And here's one, let me tell you this story. This is Pontiac Chief in the rain at Eyes on Design this year. You know, Eyes on Design didn't get rained out, but it got rained on. I got there early in the morning with a little mist, and by 10 o'clock when I left, it was just a steady rain. And I was leaving, this guy who was coming in just as I was leaving. He said, God, what a terrible day for a car show. I said, oh, as a photographer, this is a beautiful day for a car show. Look what an extra dimension that rain adds to these images, and also it softens the light. I just love these kind of shots. Now here's a Chrysler Gazelle. Chrysler used this off and on along with other images, but it shows that grace and speed and power that is often reflected in hood ornament. And here's another example of a Chrysler I found in a junkyard up by Harrison. This is, I guess it's early 50s. I don't know exactly what year, but look at how artful that is, how aesthetic that is, purely aesthetics. As is this one. This is, gosh, I love the soft light on this one. This was shot when they, at the, what used to be the Meadowbrook show, they moved it for a year or two over at Cranbrook, and it was a rainy day and storms were blasting through, and I got that nice soft light on that one. 1949 Ford. They used this Ford on 49, 50, and I think maybe 51. And this is the Nash Babe. I have her in all different colors of background. Her real name is Goddess with Wings. That she just looks like a cool beach babe to me. Often seen on the Nash Metropolitan and created by a famous sculptor whose initials are cast into the hood ornament itself. And now we're on to Lalique. Now Lalique, the famous French crystal maker, René Lalique was one of the most famous artists of his day, and he and his artisans produced about 3 dozen different mascots for ultra high-end cars of the 1920s and 30s. This one is called, let's see, next slide please, Brian, and we got another image of her. She was called, let me see, the Kneeling Nude. And she's very difficult to photograph because she's sort of facing upward, and it's really difficult to show the whole thing, but I like the colors reflected in this particular one. Next is the Lalique Cockerel. They did 2 or 3 different rooster heads that they called cockerel. And next is one of my favorite pieces. This is the centerpiece of my gallery show, the Lalique Eagle. Now, I don't recall exactly where I shot this, and I don't recall how I actually got that studio look, but there must have been a black background of some kind. I didn't doctor this photo at all. This is the way I shot it. So I wished I knew how I got that one. Okay, now back in the day, particularly in the teens and 20s, you could buy hood ornaments on the aftermarket. There were actually catalogs produced with all kinds of different images. This one is from Northern England. I found it at a show in Detroit on a 1920 Vauxhall open car, and the AOFB on the base says Associated Order of Froth Blowers. You'll notice it's a big guy sitting on a beer keg with a frothy mug of beer in his hand. I just love that one. Sometimes we find cultural references. Here, a frog on the French Delahaye. Frenchmen were often called frogs, I think derogatorily, I'm not sure. And here, next is a mosquito on an MG Skyline. MG made these wonderful cars go back to there you go. In the early 30s, called a Skyline. It was really kind of an upscale little car for an MG, but they used this mosquito, I think, to indicate the diminutive size of the MG. Next in line is the McFarlane. Fatty Arbuckle's car, actually. It's owned by Corky Coker, and it's a big, luxurious car of the day. I don't know why they use this Atlas holding the world up, but that's going to be part of the research it'll take to do that book I was talking about. Now, it was raining lightly again when I went to shoot the 100th anniversary of the Ford company down at Ford headquarters, and they had a whole parking lot full of Lincolns just as the rain was waning, and I just got this wonderful, wonderful, colorful shot. Next. Now, Plymouth used sailing ships as a theme throughout the 1930s, 40s, and even into the 50s, representing their brand. And I'll show you a few more, but they kind of changed, they kind of evolved over the years. Next. Here's another one shot in the rain. This is my wife's favorite. I think she likes that green for some reason. I'm not sure why, but you can see that sailing ship theme. It's getting a little more stylized. And here we are getting into the 50s. That one's really stylized. It looks more like a speedboat than a sailing ship. But this next one, looks like the sailing ship theme made into a rocket. And rockets, of course, were the thing in late 40s and through into the 50s, well into the 50s. Oh, wow. And speaking of rockets, here is the hood ornament on a Hupmobile coupe. It was a beautiful swoopy coupe. They had a class called swoopy coupes at Meadowbrook one year, and that's where I found this one. But it looks like a cartoon, doesn't it? And here is another bird, in this case, the raptor. Hudson used this raptor, and I just thought it was the most graceful thing ever. And I also next have it in a unrestored form. There she is with a patina of age, the raptor from Hudson. Now the Stutz company used this Egyptian mythology image of the god Ra in for their cars, beginning in 1923 and right into the 30s when they quit. They just, I think that was the only hood ornament they used was the god Ra. And here's a stylized rocket from Hudson on a Hudson Terraplane. Look at that. It's so colorful and so 1940s. It's just beautiful. And here's another mythological image from Hudson. It's a griffin, which is the head of a raptor and the body of a lion, essentially. Has those wings, and you'll see a griffin in a lot of different places, but this is the only time I think I've seen one on a car. And Cadillac, this hood ornament on a Cadillac in the early 1950s looked exactly like the one, or almost exactly like one that appeared on dashes. So I misidentified this one for a long time when I was showing it. Pierce Arrow, the archer. I've got him in a couple of forms here to show you. One of the most artistic and graceful. Look how he's leaning into the wind with his bow drawn back. Next one. And here he is again. See, he's squatting this time. He's in a different hunting position, but still that beautiful, almost abstract sort of look. This is an Art Deco one that also is hard to photograph, because no matter what angle you got, you lost part of the shape of the thing. So I barely got it in this shot, but it's very Art Deco. It shows that mechanical look that had to be embellished with art. Okay, the Rio Royale was the only Rio, by the way, Ariole's, that's the company Ariole started to build cars and trucks after he got bumped out of his own Oldsmobile company. But this one, it's neither a badge nor a hood ornament. It's a little bit of both. It's on the top of the radiator shell, sticks up a little bit, but it's more of a badge. But what a classy image. It says Rio Royale right in the center. It's the only Rio that was considered a actual classic by the Classic Car Club of America and their rules. Now, in 1954, Chrysler built a concept car called La Comtesse. It was meant to show what luxury car would be that was focused particularly on women. And in 1955, it became the Dodge La Femme. And this same hood ornament was on both. But again, a Raptor, a winged Raptor, looking like it was in flight, and such a classy design. Buick had some rather geometric designs, particularly into the 1950s. This is one of them on I think a 55 Buick. This is when they became more like hood ornaments than mascots. They were no longer a creature or it was just a piece of art or a sculpture on the hood of a car rather than on the radiator, since the radiators weren't separate anymore. Now, Lincoln used a variety of themes in the 1950s, mostly rocket related, but this one defies description. I'm not sure what it's meant to represent. It looks like a soldier or a knight in armor or something with wings, but a very pretty image anyway. And here's one that from the 1960s. Now, this is another hard one to photograph because it's so thin and simple. But when I got the reflection of the clouds in the hood of the car behind the image, that's what made that one worthwhile. Now, beyond the hood ornaments and the mascots themselves, I'm always drawn to the reflections of a car. Now, here's one of a sunbeam special down at Amelia Island this year with the cloudy sky and the palm trees reflected in it. But what a great, great image that is, I think. And the stout Scarab, built in the 30s with a flathead Ford in the rear, was a very innovative car. And for some reason, they decided to use this image of a dung beetle called a Scarab, which was quite revered in Egypt in the day. I always loved this car. It's a very unusual car. And side mounts, I have thousands of images of just the side mounts of a car. Look at you can see particularly the Art Deco details in these images, but some were covered in bodywork and some were just open with other filigree around them, and some were simple and plain. But the side mount spare tires are also a nice photographic study. Here's another reflection at Amelia Island. This is the palm trees, and on the left there you can see the hotel and an Oldsmobile Globe badge. And another, that's the same hotel, a Chrysler. Now this is a 48, I think it is, but I've shot this particular badge on many cars, and often the light will be uneven, and it is here to some degree, on one side or the other, depending on what way the car is facing in relation to the sun. But I always thought that was a classy badge. And here's a grill shell of a 1930s Chrysler. That was pretty interesting too. I just love the way it's so complex in its sculpture. And finally, here's the grill of a Duesenberg. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know what that was if you were looking at it. So there's all kinds of ways to photograph abstracts on a classic car. In this case, there's a chrome bar just below what you can see here, horizontally across these curved vertical slats in a Duesenberg grill, and that's the kind of reflections that are thrown just by these interesting chrome shapes. And that, dear friends, is the promised peek into my world. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I run into you at a car show sometime. Until then, enjoy your drive. And now, before I pass it back to Bob for the Q&A, let me bring you up to date on our Automotive Heritage Awards. This will be the third year for the Automotive Heritage Foundation's prestigious awards program, presented at the Concours d'Elegance of America at St. John's, hosted by Brembo. With the recently announced cancellation of the concours, we've decided to go full steam ahead with the awards program, but we'll be doing our awards event online. And just a reminder, the deadline for entries in our Automotive Heritage Journalism competition, which is part of that awards program, is May 30th. So you get all the details at www.autoheritageawards.com. And now our friend Bob Sadler from MotorCities will preside over the Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
I'd ask for virtual applause, but we're going to leave everybody muted for a little bit more yet. We do have a few questions that have come in via the chat, and certainly if you'd like to ask a question, you can add it to our chat area, again, located at the bottom of your screen. The first question that came in, I sent the link to your bio, Steve, but there was a question from Edwin Benson are you related to the late Ken Purdy, the noted automotive history author?
Well, you know, on my website, I have that as an FAQ because I'm often asked that. And I say probably. I know my family history back to 1632, but I've researched his and I can't find anything on Ken W. Purdy beyond his dad, who was an English professor at the University of Wisconsin. But I assume our families probably joined back there somewhere, probably in the 1800s. My family were all cattle people, essentially, and his were academics, I think.
Okay, we also had a question. This sounds like a technical, well, actually, there's a couple questions from Rich Dobson, one of which is technical related to photography. What focal length were you using for photos of mascots?
Well, in the early days, I was using that 200 millimeter fixed focal length lens. And I've used a number over the years. I like the option of a zoom lens. I used a 35 to 135 for many years. Right now, I'm using an 18 to 300. And that is a charming lens. That's what I use mostly because it'll allow me a really close up and it'll allow me to get way back and really blur the background. I just love that 18 by 300. It's fairly expensive, but it's a very versatile lens. And I shoot with a Canon FT, or I shoot with a Nikon D90 mostly.
Okay, and Rich also asked if many of those hood ornaments were accessories or extra cost items.
Many were. A lot of times they were offered as an option, and many car companies offered more than one hood ornament as an option. There are very few would come standard with the same option or the same hood ornament on every car.
Okay, and Rich also added that he thought ornament theft was probably a big deal back in the day.
Oh, it was, and destruction. You know, the Rolls Royce today still has a Spirit of Ecstasy on her hood, but when you turn off the car, a little trap door opens and the hood ornament just slides down under the hood and the trap door closes. So yes, hood ornaments, the Mercedes hood ornament back in the 60s and 70s was popular because a hippie could come along and rip it right off and it looked like a peace symbol on his shirt. That was a big problem back then.
Yes, we also had a comment, not really a question, from Mary Seelhorst, talking about the Classic Car Club of America Museum at Gilmore with their collection, which is quite amazing, of 700 plus mascots and hood ornaments. I'm sure you've seen that, Steve.
Yes, I have. It is one of the, probably, it might be the premier collection of hood ornaments in the country. And it's so close to us here in Michigan.
And
can't see that.
Yes, that is, we lovingly refer to it at MotorCities as our Western outpost, our Western welcome to the MotorCities National Heritage Area. Another question from Rich Dotson. Have you collected photos of other automotive or non-automotive objects?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the hood ornaments and automotive stuff is just a part of what I shoot. I do a lot of nature stuff, blossoms, but one of my favorite things is close-ups of faces, not only of people, but of animals. I've got dogs and horses and cattle and other close-ups of faces. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I'm normally drawn to the details of a thing. I seldom shoot a wide shot. I'm always going in for those details on pretty much anything. But the faces and the animals and the blossoms and those kind of things are some of my favorites.
Okay, I'm scrolling through, looking for some more questions. Kathy Marcaccio says, one of my favorites is the Dodge Ram by Avard Fairbanks. Its evolution from hood ornament to badge is interesting even today. Do you have any thoughts on that, Steve?
Well, yes, I've read up on that a little bit in researching hood ornaments for the book, and there is a story behind that. And, you know, I just can't recall what it is right now without my notes. But yes, that's a very common one, that Ram. It had to do with driving down the road, and if you got in the way, the Ram would bump you out of the way or something to that effect. But it's in my notes somewhere. I wish I could recite that for you.
Okay, a question from Dave Todd. Do you have a similar presentation on non-mascot hood ornaments like the 1950s Buick piece that you showed?
I don't have one prepared, but I could, because I've shot enough of those details to make a presentation out of it. Yes, and there's a lot of those more modern details of cars too. Yeah, I could do that.
Okay. Looks like Judy Christie, is Judy Christie still on the call? Judy had a question about something that she has at her home, and it looks like a hood ornament. I don't know if you wanted to ask that question perhaps directly, Judy. She's got visual.
Yeah. Yeah, this is.
Oh, hi, Judy. Oh, yes.
Hi, Steve. It looks like a hood ornament.
Yes,
it's on
it
a
is.
plaque that we got from Pontiac, and it's the 50-year anniversary. But I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, it appears to be a Pontiac hood ornament. If you'll look closely, I think the face of that image is probably the Indian.
Yes.
That's an Indian face, yep. I haven't seen that particular one, but I've seen some similar to it. But yeah, if that says Pontiac on it, that'll be one of the chieftains, and that was probably
Pontiac.
not a car at one time.
Yeah, she has her feathers right up there.
And there's blowing out behind, yep. Does it appear to be a female image or a male? Or can you tell?
It's a female, definitely a female.
Oh, okay, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, oh, cool. I haven't seen that. I would love to have a picture of that sometime. Maybe we can
I'll
get
be
together.
glad to share.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay, Brian, if we could have the last couple slides of my presentation back up there, please. Just a couple things as we wrap up. Let's open up the mics if there are any other questions that we haven't heard. We don't want to have everybody speaking over each other, but I think we can all play nice with the 50 or so of us that are still left. If there are any questions that you might have for Steve that you want to ask, we do have a little bit of time.
Hey, Steve, it's Don Graham. Hello.
Hi, Don.
You know what? Your presentation brought back many, many memories, I'm sure, for most everybody who's in attendance today. And I remember seeing a lot of hood ornaments when I was young, and I always enjoyed that river of chrome that came down the center of the hood, especially
yeah.
Pontiacs, that big wide, almost like multi-stripe. And I remember when it split out in 1955, I believe it was. But tell me, when does a badge and a hood ornament, is it location because of the size or the shape? And then one more point is, I thought I recognized the radiator.
If we could have whoever's got that noise, if you're not talking, you could mute yourselves. Thank you.
Don, ask the end of that question again.
I was speaking about the location of a badge versus a hood ornament, if it's the location or the size or the shape. And also beyond that, I noticed that, or at least I felt like a number of the hood ornaments were like a radiator cap. Could you speak to that?
Yes. Well, I don't know that there's any formal definition of any of those. I think of as a mascot as of the early days sitting on top of a radiator, essentially. A hood ornament being on a hood rather than a radiator shell, and a badge being flat instead of standing up. Now, a badge could be on a fender. It could be on a nose, on a hood, or I mean on a trunk or anything. But the difference between the hood ornament and the mascot, I think of as whether it's on a radiator shell or on a hood. But again, I don't know if there's any formal definition. That's just kind of an informal one that I think of. Thanks for the question.
You're very welcome.
Okay, we've got another question. How did the nickname Mascot come about?
Well, that's a good question also. It was the original purpose of those was to kind of set the image of a brand. So, and most of them were either, in the earliest days, were either mythical images of gods or animals or other things. So they were animated. They were actually, you know, people or animals. I think of those as the mascots. And I think that's where their term came from, because they represented what the brand wanted to project. Speed and power and gracefulness and those kind of things.
Right.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. I've got just a couple quick things I want to make sure I mention before we conclude the presentation today. First of all, we did have, if you've enjoyed this presentation, there are a number of ways that you can support continuing these great programs from MotorCities. One is to become a member, which you can do on our website. if you look at the Support Us tab at the top of the homepage. Also, we have an easy way to make a donation via PayPal, and Brian has put the link on the chat area if you want to go there and support us via PayPal. That is there. And finally, we will continue this Motor Cities at Home series again next Friday. Again, we will convene at noon. And I know our speaker for next week, I believe he's still on the call. Russ Doré is going to be presenting on Billy Durant, the founder of General Motors. I didn't know, Russ, if you wanted to say anything quick as a sneak preview of what people might expect next week.
Well, Billy's an interesting person. Unlike Henry Ford, who just built one company, Billy really didn't get into the business till he was 40 either, but he just bought existing companies. And we talk about the origins of all the existing companies also before Billy got involved, and then how he put them all together. So it's a fun, and he was a character.
So we hope to see you next Friday for the next installment of our Motor Cities at Home series. I appreciate everybody joining us today. Again, have a wonderful Friday, and we will plan on seeing you again next week.
Thank you. Nice job.
Steve, I got one question here from our junior participant. What do you want to know, Aaron?
When was the first mascot invented?
So when was the first
well,
mascot on the vehicle?
In the very earliest part of the 20th century, probably early 1900s, this Spirit of Ecstasy I talked about was created in 1909, but I think there were a number of others in like 1901, 1902, and that era. Was as soon as there was radiator shells to embellish, and actually I'll add one more little tidbit. There was a thing called the motometer, which stuck out of the top of the radiator and was actually a temperature gauge, and those became fancier and fancier and fancier until they added the images onto the motometer. So that was the earliest part of the 1900s.
She kind of wants to know why they don't put mascots like Sparty, the Michigan State Spartan, on the top of a car. That would make mascots.
That would be perfect. And in those days when you could buy aftermarket ones, that I'm sure would have been part of it if we had Sparty back then. And go green. Go green.
Have a nice day, everybody. We'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks a lot.
See ya.
Steve.
Bye-bye.
Bye.